For the house, Sloane. Just sign it. You were never supposed to have it anyway. That was my aunt, standing in my grandmother's kitchen 3 days after we buried her, holding a document I had never seen before. Her voice was calm. That was the part that scared me most. Not the words. The calm. I'm a paralegal. I've spent 6 years watching people say terrible things to each other across conference tables and keep their voices perfectly level. I know what it sounds like when someone has already decided how a conversation ends before it begins. I put down my coffee cup. I looked at the document, and I thought, something is very wrong here. Let me back up. My grandmother, I called her Gram, raised me, not metaphorically, literally. My mom left when I was 4. My dad was in and out, mostly out, and by the time I was 7, Gram had full custody and a second bedroom painted yellow because she asked me my favorite color and then went to Home Depot the next morning. She was 71 years old and she repainted that room herself. I watched her do it. She got paint on her glasses and laughed. That house, a 3-bedroom Craftsman in Pasadena, was hers for 40 years. She paid it off in 2009. She told me once, sitting on the porch with iced tea, that the house was the only thing she'd ever owned that nobody could take from her. She said it like it meant something. It did. I moved back in with her 2 years ago when she got her diagnosis. Early stage dementia, then not so early. I took a hybrid schedule at work, hired a part-time aide for the mornings, and handled everything else myself. Grocery runs, medication, doctor's appointments, the slow, quiet work of watching someone you love start to lose the edges of themselves. My aunt, my dad's sister, visited 4 times in those 2 years. 4, I counted. She lives 40 minutes away. She sent flowers on Graham's birthday. Nice ones. Expensive. She called every few weeks and asked how things were going and said she wished she could do more. She always had a reason why she couldn't. I stopped asking. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about, was that during one of those 4 visits, 6 months before Graham died, my aunt had brought a notary. I found that out on a Tuesday, standing in that kitchen reading a document that purported to transfer the house to my aunt upon my grandmother's death. It was dated 8 months ago. It had my grandmother's signature, and it had been witnessed by someone I'd never heard of, notarized, and, according to my aunt, already filed with the county recorder's office. You should have thought about this, she said, taking the document back from my hands with a small, practiced motion. You can't live here indefinitely. It was never meant to be your house. I said I needed some air. I walked out the back door and stood in Graham's garden between the rose bushes she planted in 1987, and I breathed. In. Out. The jasmine on the back fence was blooming. She loved that jasmine. I thought about calling my boyfriend Marcus, but I stopped myself. I needed to think clearly first. I needed to know what I was actually looking at before I said anything to anyone. In my line of work, you don't react to documents. You read them. I went back inside. My aunt was on her phone in the living room. I went to Graham's bedroom, still her bedroom, still smelling faintly of her lavender hand cream. And I sat on the edge of the bed and I started to think through everything I knew. Graham had a will. I knew this because I had sat with her and her attorney, a man named Mr. Whitfield, in 2021 when she'd had it updated. She was sharp then. Tired sometimes, but sharp. She'd left the house to me. She'd been explicit about it, she said, and I remember this word for word. You earned it, baby, not because you took care of me, because you chose to. The document my aunt had just shown me was not that will. It was something else, a deed transfer, signed 8 months ago when Graham's dementia had already progressed significantly. When she was having bad days more often than good ones, when she sometimes didn't know what year it was. I am a paralegal. I know what undue influence is. I know what capacity requirements look like. And I know that a deed transfer executed when someone is in cognitive decline, witnessed by a stranger with no independent legal counsel present, is exactly the kind of document that gets challenged in court. I also know that knowledge means nothing without evidence. So I started building a case. I didn't let my aunt see me do it. I helped with the leftover food from the reception. I made small talk with her husband when he arrived. I helped carry some of Graham's things to the donation boxes my aunt had started filling, until I quietly redirected anything that might be relevant. Letters, notes, the little calendar Graham kept by the phone where she wrote down appointments in her loopy handwriting. I texted Marcus that night, told him what had happened. He drove over in 40 minutes and sat with me at the kitchen table while I laid out everything I'd collected. He's not in law, he's in IT, but he's methodical and he doesn't panic. He looked at the document my aunt had left a copy of and he said, "That notary seal, can you find out who that is?" I could, and I did. The notary was a woman who worked at a shipping and printing center my aunt used regularly. I found her name in the county notary registry. I found the date of the notarization, and then I called Mr. Whitfield. He remembered Graham. Of course he did. He'd known her for 20 years. I told him what my aunt had presented. There was a pause on his end of the line. Then he said, quietly, "Sloane, that deed was executed 4 months after your grandmother came to see me about something. She called me because she was confused about some papers her daughter-in-law had asked her to sign. She didn't sign them that day. She called me first." He had notes from that conversation. Graham had called him. She'd been uncertain. She'd felt pressured, and she'd reached out to her attorney before doing anything. He had counseled her not to sign anything without reviewing it first. And she'd said she understood. Somehow, 4 months later, she had signed anyway. Mr. Whitfield said he wanted to see the deed. He said he had concerns. He said he thought we should talk to someone in elder law. I drove to his office the next morning with every document I had. The next 3 weeks were the most focused I have ever been in my life. I was still going to work. I was still dealing with the practical aftermath of losing Grim and her accounts, her subscriptions, the aide we had to let go, the medications to return, and in every spare moment I was building a file. I pulled Graham's medical records from the 6 months around the deed's signing date. Her neurologist's notes were detailed. They documented her cognitive state at each appointment. Around the time of the signing, she had been assessed as having moderate dementia. Moderate. That is not a person who has the legal capacity to execute a property transfer. I tracked down the home health aide who had worked mornings at the house. She was a woman named Teresa, retired now but still sharp, and when I explained why I was calling, she went quiet for a moment and then said, "I always wondered about that visit." She'd been there the day my aunt came with the notary. She hadn't been in the room. My aunt had asked her to give them privacy, but she'd heard voices. She said my grandmother had sounded confused. She said she'd heard my aunt's voice, calm and even, repeating things slowly. She said when she came back into the room, Graham had been holding a pen and there were papers on the table. Teresa agreed to write a statement. I filed a petition to contest the deed transfer. My aunt called me the night the paperwork was served. "You're making a mistake," she said. There was no calm this time. "Do you know what this is going to cost you? Legally, financially? You're a paralegal. You're not a lawyer. You don't know what you're walking into." I let her talk. "There's a technique. I had read about it years ago, thought about it more in the last few weeks, called the gray rock method. You become unresponsive, flat. You give the other person nothing to grab onto, no emotion, no reaction, no fuel. You become a gray rock, unremarkable, immovable. I had never understood it as a survival tool until that phone call. I said, "I understand your concern. I'll be in touch through counsel," and I hung up. She called my dad. He called me, left a voicemail I didn't return for 2 days. When I did call back, he said my aunt was devastated and that I was tearing the family apart over a house. I said, "Dad, Graham had moderate dementia when she signed that document. I have her medical records." There was a long silence. "She seemed fine," he said finally. "She always seemed fine." That's the thing about dementia that people don't understand. Until they're in it. They seem fine sometimes. That's the cruelest part. The bad days don't announce themselves. The person you love can have a bright, clear morning and a completely lost afternoon. And someone who only visited 4 times in 2 years would always time the visit to catch a good hour. I didn't say any of that. I said, "The court will review the medical records, Dad," and I ended the call. My attorney. I had retained one by then, a woman named Miss Park who specialized in elder law and had kind eyes and a voice like a closing argument, filed for an emergency injunction to prevent the house from being transferred or encumbered while the case was pending. It was granted. My aunt, apparently not having anticipated that this would actually go anywhere, hired her own attorney. There were depositions scheduled. Letters were exchanged. The notary, when deposed, said my aunt had told her the signing was a simple estate formality and that the woman signing was a bit forgetful but totally with it. She hadn't asked for any documentation of capacity. She hadn't been told there was a diagnosis. Then we deposed my aunt's husband. I don't know what he expected the deposition to be. I don't know if my aunt had told him what to say or assumed he already knew or just hadn't thought it through. But when Ms. Park asked him, under oath, whether he had been present during any of the conversations his wife had had with my grandmother about the property, he said yes. Miss Park asked him what was discussed. He said, and I am not exaggerating, my wife explained to her that the house should stay in the family, on the family side. Miss Park asked him to clarify what he meant by the family side. He said, well, not on the other side. The other side was me, the child she raised, the granddaughter who spent 2 years sleeping down the hall so she wouldn't wake up alone. Miss Park paused, in the way that good attorneys pause, not from surprise, but to let the silence do its work. Then she asked him whether my grandmother had, in his presence, expressed any wish to change her estate plan. He said she had seemed open to it. Miss Park asked whether he meant the grandmother with moderate dementia had seemed open to it when presented with documents by her daughter-in-law in her own home with no attorney present. He didn't answer that one well. The case was settled 5 weeks later. My aunt did not get the house. The deed transfer was voided on grounds of lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. The original will, Graham's will, the one from 2021, the one she'd signed when she was clear-eyed and certain, went back into effect. The house passed to me. My aunt did not speak at Graham's second memorial, the small one we held in the garden in spring. She didn't come. My dad came. He stood by the jasmine and didn't say much. Before he left, he stopped next to me and said, "She would have wanted you to have it." I said, "I know. I don't know if we'll be close again. I don't know if what broke can be repaired. What I know is that I spent 2 years in that house because Graham needed someone to be there. I know that I painted her nails when her hands shook too much to do it herself. I know she called me baby right up until the end, even when she couldn't always remember my name. The house is mine now, not because a court said so, though it did. Because she said so in a room with her attorney and a cup of tea, on a clear-headed afternoon in 2021 when she was still fully herself. I repainted the yellow bedroom last month. Same color. Matched it exactly. It's a guest room now, but I kept the color because some things deserve to stay. I still have the calendar Graham kept by the phone, the one where she wrote appointments in her loopy handwriting. Some of the entries are hard to read now. Her letters got shakier toward the end, but they're hers. Every single one. I think about her a lot when I'm in the house. Not in a heavy way. Just the ordinary kind of remembering. The kind where you're doing dishes and you suddenly hear someone's laugh in your head. Clear as anything. What happened with my aunt used to make me angrier than it does now. Not because I've forgiven it exactly, but because I've had time to understand what it actually was. It wasn't personal, as strange as that sounds. My aunt didn't do what she did because she hated me. She did it because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that she deserved something she hadn't earned, and that the easiest path to it was through someone she'd underestimated. That's a different kind of wrong. Quieter, and in some ways, sadder. The choices she made had a logic to them, and that logic had a cost. She brought a notary to her mother-in-law's home when that woman had moderate dementia. She told the notary it was a formality. She kept it from her own attorney, from her family, from anyone who might have said, wait, and when it unraveled, because these things do unravel, it unraveled completely, not just the deed. The relationships, the credibility, all of it. What you build on something that isn't yours doesn't hold. I want to be careful here, because I don't think I was brave in any extraordinary way. I was scared through most of it. I cried in Miss Park's parking lot after our first meeting. I called Marcus at midnight more than once just to have someone on the line while I went through documents. Being a paralegal helped, but it didn't make it easy. Nothing about it was easy. What got me through was something simpler than courage. It was just the refusal to look away from what I knew was true. Graham had been clear. The records were clear. Teresa remembered what she'd seen. The truth was already there. It just needed someone willing to follow it all the way to the end, even when the end was expensive and slow and exhausting. I think that's the thing nobody tells you about doing the right thing. It rarely feels righteous while you're doing it. It mostly feels like paperwork and waiting and people telling you you're making a mistake. The clarity only comes later. And it does come. There's something I believe now that I didn't fully understand before all this, that how you treat people when you think no one is watching is the thing that actually defines you. My aunt thought nobody was paying close enough attention. She thought a quiet afternoon and a confused old woman and a notary seal would be enough. She didn't account for Teresa, standing in the hallway noticing. She didn't account for Mr. Whitfield, who had kept his notes. She didn't account for the fact that Graham had raised someone who knew how to read a document and wouldn't stop until it meant something. The yellow bedroom is the same color it always was. Some things deserve to stay.